Our scripture passage today, we're continuing in our book, in our series in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, and we're looking at verses 39 through 49. So read along with me as we go into this passage. 39 through 49. And he also spoke a parable to them. A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? And a pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone, after he has been fully trained, will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrites, first take out the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. For there is no good tree which produces bad fruit, nor, on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, and they do not pick grapes from a briar bush. The good man out of the good treasures of his heart brings forth that which is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasures of his heart brings forth that which is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when a flood occurred, the torrent burst against that house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who had heard and not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house on the ground without any foundation, and the torrent burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great. And may God add the blessing to the reading of his word. Have you ever heard someone tell a good story? We have some good storytellers in our church here. I've heard quite a few stories now and then about things that have happened. Have you ever tried to figure out the point of the story? I know I have sometimes. You used to listen to an older person tell a story, and you're trying to figure out what's the whole point of the story. And then you hear the saying, well, the moral of the story is, and so you always try and figure out, well, what's the point of the story? And so that's really important, because a good storyteller always has a point in mind when he's trying to tell a story. Not just, maybe he's trying to get a laugh, but maybe there's something that maybe he's trying to convey, that he's trying to tell you through a story. So you can learn and so you can understand. Some people, when they listen and they hear, that's how they understand. It's through a story. And in today's passage, Jesus is the master storyteller. He's conveying his truths through stories that hit home and resonate with all those who hear. So, in other words, Jesus knew that people learn, and they learn truths, not just through straight teaching sometimes, but through stories, because they can understand stories. And often Jesus would tell stories in a way and he would use illustrations in ways that people could understand during those times. And today is the same way. And so we're going to be looking at some parables, which are stories that convey a truth that Jesus used to teach some of his teachings. And it's going to be in the same vein. This is called the teaching on the plain, like the Beatitudes. This is Luke's version of the Beatitudes, but it's another, like a Sermon on the Mount, but this is a Sermon on the Plain. And so this is another time where Jesus was teaching his people, and he was using parables and using stories to tell them important truths that he wanted them to learn. But again, it's in the vein and it's in the light of, as I was talking about last week, and how we treat others and how we look at one another and how we love one another genuinely and how we treat others in that way. And so Jesus is using stories today to teach us what real love is and how we can actually do that in our lives. We're going to be looking at 3 specific points here. Number 1, parables, the blind leading the blind. Number 2, parables, good fruit and bad fruit. And then thirdly, parables, good foundation, bad foundation. So those are the things that we're going to be looking at this morning. The blind leading the blind, parables. And he spoke to them, and a blind man cannot lead a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? Now that may sound ludicrous. So he's asking a rhetorical question. He said, a blind man cannot lead a blind man, can he? Won't they both fall into a pit? Think about it. Doesn't that make sense? It makes sense that if somebody's blind and they can't see, they're not going to know where they're going to go. And so a blind man can't lead a blind man. When I was younger, I lived with an older, elderly blind man, a man who had lost his sight. And so I had to help him around and so to guide him to where he was going when I was in the house. But if I was blind too, I would be just as bad as he, because I couldn't see where I was going. And so the point is that a blind man can't lead another blind man. They're both going to fall and get into danger. But Jesus' point is, it says a pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone after he's been fully trained will be like his teacher. So you can't learn, what he's saying there is, you can't learn from someone who's not learning. So you can't learn from someone who hasn't been taught themselves. Because you're both going to lead each other down the wrong path. And that's what he was saying there. He says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? And how can you say, brother, let me take out the speck in your own eye, when you do not see the log that is in your own eye? What does real love do? What does real love do? Think about this in your heart. What would real love do when they see an issue in someone else? Do they automatically feel compelled to, you have to point it out and talk to them about it? Sometimes we do that. And that's what Jesus' whole point is. Real love will say, well, let me see what's in my own heart first. Real love will say, let me see if there's any sin in my own heart first before I begin to start criticizing someone else for something that's going on in their own life. And that's really important for us to make sure. And that's what he was saying. You know, so what he's saying is, make sure before you take the log, it's a little easy because we get specks in our eye, don't we? We get little specks, and it's kind of annoying sometimes, especially when it gets under the eyelid. And it can be irritating, can irritate our eye a little bit. And you see a little speck in someone else's eye, says, hey, let me help you get that out. And all the while there's a big old log, and this is just as being an example, there's a big old log in your own eye that you should be able to see, that you're not even willing to take out because you're worried about the speck in someone else's eye. And that's really, really important. We need to examine ourselves first. I'm not saying that you don't speak to other people about things that are going on in their life. I'm not saying that. But what he's saying is real love will say, okay, let me see if there's things in my own heart first. Let me make sure my heart's right first. Let me make sure there's things inside me that are not right. And let me deal with that and make sure that I'm cleansed and right before the Lord before I go and I deal with someone else. And that's really important because that's what real love will do. Real love will say, yeah, maybe I got something going on in my own life and I need to deal with first. And then once I deal with the thing in my own heart first, then I can go and deal with the other person. And then I can maybe help them out. Rather than criticize, I can maybe help build them up. And maybe I can be constructive rather than destructive. Because sometimes when we're in a criticizing mood, we destroy rather than build up. Don't we sometimes? When we're critical, what often happens when we're critical and we start getting critical with others? It kind of breaks people down, doesn't it? But if we're going there with a right frame of mind and we go in there with a right heart, it can be an opportunity to what? To build, to be constructive, to build up, and to help that individual, can't we? And so that's why when we make sure we deal with things in our own hearts first, then we can go in with the right attitude to help someone else. And that's what's really, really, really important. And so just check our own hearts. And that's what Jesus was just trying to say here. And so if we don't, we'll do more destruction than we will construction. And that's what we want to do. We're going to build building people's hearts through Christ. That's our job, and that's what he wants us to do. Secondly, good fruit, bad fruit. For there's no good tree which produces bad fruit, nor is there not, on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. Each tree is known by its own fruit, for men do not gather figs from thorns, nor they pick grapes from a briar bush. We have a beautiful magnolia tree on the side of our house, and it's in full bloom right now. It only lasts for maybe several days, maybe a week tops. And it's just a gorgeous tree. You know that it's a magnolia tree just by the blooms on it. You can tell. And it's just the pink blooms, the big leafy blooms. It's really just a pretty, pretty tree. And we see them a lot around here. And so, and you know that that's a magnolia tree. And you look at other trees, and you can tell, well, that's an apple tree, or that's a peach tree. Any good gardener will know what kind of tree that is. Or it's a pear tree, or that's... and some trees, they have really good fruit. And you really, like an apple, you take the apple off and you bite into it. It's just like this juicy, crisp apple that, it's like the best apple ever. And then you take a piece off another tree, and it's got all thorns and thistles on it. You take it off and you bite it, it's like, ugh! And it's all rotten. And that's the whole point of Jesus' story here, the parable. He's trying to convey truth that you know what good fruit looks like. You know what bad fruit looks like. You can tell the difference. You can look at it, and you can look at it and tell the difference, and you can taste it and see the difference. And so you know, and any good gardener, I used to do gardening for years and years and years. And so you know things by looking at it. And you know when it's good and when it's bad. Same thing with us. You look at our own lives. And we can't, if we have Jesus in us, what should we be producing? If Jesus is in us, and Jesus is good, and Jesus is right, and Jesus is all that that we should be, if he's in us, then what kind of fruit should we be producing? Good fruit. Well, how do people know us? How do people know who we are? How do they know what's in our hearts? How will they know that you're a Christian? There's a little old song that I used to know. It's called, "They will know we are Christians by our love." They'll know you're a Christian by how? By the fruit that you bear through what? Love, isn't it? They'll know by your kindness, by your generosity, like we talked about last week, by the good things that you produce from your heart. And they'll know that you're not by the things that you don't produce from your heart. Because it tells us here, it says in verse 45, the good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth that which is good. So that meaning is that you have Christ in your heart. If you have the Lord in your heart, you're going to produce good. And people are going to see that. Are you that good crisp apple? Are you that good juicy apple that people just want to bite into? Because you see the fruit of your life. Or, and the evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bring forth that which is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. So, bad tree is going to produce, or a bad bush, or whatever produces fruit, is going to produce bad because it's from the root and from the seed, it's bad, isn't it? But if it's good, it's going to produce good. And so it's the same thing with us. If there's bad seed in us, what are we going to speak? It says, from the fullness of his heart, a man speaks. So if there's evil in your heart, if there's not good in your heart, what are you going to speak? What are you going to speak to people? Is it going to be kind things? Is it going to be things that build up? Is it going to be constructive things? Is it going to be things that show the love of Christ? Or is it going to be mean things, or things that bring down, or gossip, or hurtful things that bring people down? What do people see in us? And that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. What do people see in us? Do they see that you're a Christian? It's not that, and you don't always have to preach the gospel. People need to know that you're a Christian just by your very life. Preach Christ at all times and necessary, use words. What is your life displaying? Are you displaying the good fruit in your life? Are you displaying that positive fruit? That fruit that shows the love of Christ to our fellow man and to each other? I'm not saying that we're perfect, but if we have Christ in us, we're going to display the good fruit, aren't we? And look at your own life and see what type of fruit you're displaying in your own lives. Because that's what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to produce that good fruit. And lastly, parables, good foundation, bad foundation. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? And what he's saying here is, he's saying, you respect the teaching of Jesus and the authority of Jesus. You respect him and what he says, that you're going to do what he tells you to do. And ultimately, that's what even our children, hopefully that's what we try and teach our children. We try and teach our children to respect us as parents and to do what we ask them to do. Same thing it is with us with Jesus. We respect Jesus enough and who he is and what he says that we're going to do, and we're going to be obedient to what he tells us to do. And so that's what this particular parable is about. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show him who he is like. So here's what he's saying here. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them. He hears, and then what does he do? It's twofold. He hears, but he just doesn't walk away. But he hears and he acts on them. We can hear, but then we can ignore. Or we can hear and we can act. And when we hear and we act on what he says, that's where there's safety, that's where there's protection, that's where there's prosperity, that's where there's wisdom and leading. And because he gives you an example here, and we know this story here, a man building his house. A lot of us in here like construction. A lot of us, especially the men, love to do things with their hands and build things and make sure they want quality things. And so we're not going to build houses that are on sand. I used to work down on Absecon Island, which is Atlantic City, Ventnor, Margate, and Longport. It's one island, and it goes from Atlantic City all the way down to the end of Longport. And most of the houses, especially on the perimeter, it's an island, and it's sand. It's built on sand. And I was, this is a story, some of you may remember this, but there was a storm back in 1962. It was a really bad nor'easter hurricane. And the end of Longport, 6 blocks was wiped out and washed into the ocean. 6 blocks of land. That's a lot of land, isn't it? And people had houses on those land. And then I was there, it's probably about 10 years ago, and there's jetties there, and the jetties probably are where these big boulders, and they're right on the edge of the water. Right on the edge of the water, and a storm could come and wipe them out. And people still built there, and these are multi-million-dollar homes. And to me, and people still did that, even knowing that the storm back in 1962 took out 6 blocks of beach, and homes were wiped away. And so conventional wisdom would say, well, maybe I better not build a house there. Maybe I better not buy a house there. Because they can't get homeowners insurance. Because no one will insure them. Because it doesn't make sense. But people want what they want. And so that's not really wise. And what Jesus is trying to say here is a person who builds their house, their foundation, is going to build on sound wisdom that Jesus gives. That he's telling us stuff not to harm us, not to hurt us, or not to be a killjoy, but he's going to tell us, he gives us sound wisdom to say, okay, I'm doing this so that I can protect you, so that we can watch over you, so that I can prosper you, so that I can care for you, so that you can be all that I want you to be. And so, do we respect Jesus enough that when he tells us to do something, and he's doing it for a reason and there's wisdom behind it, that we listen to him and we respect what he says and say, okay, Jesus, I don't always understand this, but I'm going to do what you say. Because I want to be like the man who builds his house on the rock and says, okay, my rock, when the storm comes and the rain comes, my house is good and high, and nothing's going to happen. And I'm going to be okay. And nothing's going to happen. And so that's the same way it is with us in our lives. And so the reality is that Jesus is telling us that we need, as his people, we need to listen to what he's saying. We need to first fix our own hearts first before we begin to try and fix others. And ask Jesus, Jesus, help me to fix my heart. Help me to see what's wrong, what's going on in my own heart. And Jesus, help me to deal with that. Please help me. So that then we can begin to, in love, be able to help others as well. And then be the good fruit, which comes from the treasures of your heart. Plant seeds that are good in your own heart. Plant those good seeds so that we can produce those good seeds that come out. So we can so people can look at us and say, he's a Christian. Maybe not by him just preaching, but by his life displaying love, the love of Christ. They'll know you are Christians by what? The love that you have for one another. The good fruit that comes out from your life. And number 3 is that be wise and follow Jesus' advice and counsel. In the end, you'll be safe and secure. How have you listened to Jesus and followed his counsel? And those are the things we need to ask ourselves. Because when we do, in the end, we'll be wise and we'll be safe and we'll be secure. Amen?